talk about how the Fed does intercede into the market. And just to review a little bit as to some of the interest rates that we're going to be talking about. Here in the US, the overnight rate of interest that banks borrow and lend money from each other at is the Fed funds rate. And that is the rate that banks borrow and lend excess reserves from each other to meet their reserve requirements. Because as a bank, you have to keep a certain percentage of your deposits on deposit at the Fed. And that number literally can change daily. So if one bank has more deposits than withdrawals tonight, they have to put more money on deposit at the Fed tonight. Conversely, if banks have a withdrawal, they have a surplus of funds there, they can lend those funds out. And the rate at which banks borrow and lend money from each other is the Fed funds rate. That is the interbank rate, the rate that banks borrow and lend from each other. This rate is set by the Fed. When the press talks about the Fed is raising and lowering interest rates, this is the interest rate that we're talking about. And as we've stressed in Module 1, this is the interest rate that has been down at 0 since 2010. Now, just to quickly highlight some of the other rates associated with this short end of the market. The discount rate, all right, is the rate that banks can borrow from the Fed. The Fed is the lender of last resort. The way we have the safety of our monetary and our banking system is the fact that if banks get into trouble, they can borrow from the Fed. And when you do, you are borrowing at the discount rate, or the slang term you'll hear for that is the window, literally like a teller's window. So if such and such a bank goes up to the window, they're borrowing directly from the Fed. This rate is also set by the Fed. And since 2010, the discount rate has been at 50 basis points. Meaning the Fed funds rate is lower than the discount rate today. Meaning the Fed is trying to encourage banks to borrow from each other. However, if you can't borrow enough in the Fed funds market, you can borrow directly from the Fed at the window.